The Autistic Culture Podcast Network, the sound of autistic culture. ACPN.
Whenever I talk about my Aunt Sabrina, I cry. My heart swells in awe and wonder. I cry the way some people cry when they meet the Dalai Lama, or the Pope, or Oprah. Sabrina is my Oprah. Since this show is about being a neurocomplex creative with big feelings, that feels like exactly the right place to start. Several years ago, a therapist once asked me, who in your childhood made you feel safe and seen and heard and loved? The answer was immediate: my Aunt Sabrina. I've known her for almost my entire life, over 45 years. She was my aunt through marriage, and when that marriage ended, there was a long stretch in the middle where we lost track of each other. And then we found our way back, the way people who were always supposed to be in each other's lives eventually do. When I was a young child, Sabrina was the only adult I can think of who just seemed to get me. And she herself was so full of love, of joy, of goodness, of funniness, of warmth and good energy that I couldn't help but fall in love with her. She was that inspiring to me. Here was this woman who felt everything deeply and used it beautifully, who made the world around her warmer just by being in it. She could meet me in my curiosity. She could meet me in my creativity and my weirdness. She taught me about art. She took me to theater and movies. She asked me deep, intelligent questions, and she listened when I answered. That alone made a world of difference. She was funny. She was playful. Every time I saw her, I picked up a new joke. She'd bring me some silly toy from the local toy store, Groucho Marx glasses, funny rubber faces. She made being alive feel like something worth showing up for. I grew up in a perfectly boring suburb of East San Jose where most of my neighbors worked in tech. By comparison, Berkeley was a smorgasbord of color and arts and culture. Sabrina was getting her degree at UC Berkeley, and having her open up the world of education and the arts to me was one of the things that made the biggest impression on me as a kid. She didn't just see me. She showed me a more vibrant world and made me feel like I belonged in it. Sabrina has a PhD in theater. She spent her career creating educational theater that said things that were true and brave and important to say, including a production called Secrets in the 1980s that talked honestly to teenagers about the AIDS crisis at a time when that was genuinely dangerous territory. That's Sabrina, choosing the true, brave, important thing her whole life, even when it costs her something. Sabrina has known every version of me and met me where I was with love and acceptance. I can be weird, funny, sad, overwhelmed, ridiculous, whatever I actually am that day or even that moment. As a high-masking autistic person, I naturally mirror the people I'm with. I attune to their energy, their pace, and their frequency. In this conversation, you'll hear a slightly more buttoned-up version of me than she usually gets. She understands how my health slows me down. What you're hearing is me showing up as fully as I can, even though I can't rally the way I used to. My hope is that the more alive version of me will start to peek out more and more as this show moves forward. But right now, I need to meet my own energy where it's at, and I'm choosing to believe that's enough. This episode is about big feelings, what they need, what becomes possible when one person creates a container for them instead of shutting them down. It's about what it means to have someone in your life who has known you for 45 years and can meet you in your own complexity. It's about giftedness and emotional intensity and the arts, and what theater actually does for people who feel everything. Sabrina said something in our conversation that I keep returning to. She was talking about theater, about what it gave her as someone who also felt everything too deeply. She said, it was appropriate to be too much in a room of creativity like that. Here's Sabrina. Welcome to the Neurocomplex Creative. I'm your host, Vicki Peterson, and today we have a very special person to me, Sabrina Klein-Clement. Sabrina, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, and not the resume version, but the real version about who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm now just in retirement, and it's allowing me to see things in a different light, which I'm loving. When I was 5 years old and had brain fever, I had encephalitis and burned off part of my brain. And I had learned how to read before then. And then my mom tells me after the encephalitis, that part of my brain had burned off and I had to learn how to read with a different part of my brain. And ever since then, it's been abundantly clear to the people around me that I think differently than other people. And it could just be because my language comes from a different part of the brain. I don't really know. But because of that, I've always been fascinated by language. And that's the first thing that drew me to theater when I was 5 years old and played Grandma in Little Red Riding Hood in the kindergarten play. What I loved was how the staging and the language together made a character and a situation so vital. My mom never did forgive me because I was supposed to play Red, but my best friend, Becky Fisher, cried. So I volunteered to be Grandma, and I loved it. I loved the character acting more than anything. I'm completely missing a photo album in my head. So although I can see you and know who you are, if we're in a crowd and you show up in a place where I'm not expecting to see you, it will take more than me seeing you to recognize you. So my visual side didn't work at all. After being told that I was tone deaf when there was no such thing as tone deafness, I let go of music. And so theater was the best of all possible worlds to me. It was like finding my language.
Yeah, and doing it with such an open heart, which is what I remember so deliciously about just being a kid and growing up and, seeing you and getting my first impression of you, carrying that through.
Well, for me, theater really became the primary way of connecting to my own humanity and also to the humanity of others. I played roles that were in situations I never would have been in. I directed plays from cultures that I wouldn't have experienced otherwise and learned about the humanity behind the expression of body and voice working together to tell a story.
Yes,
So,
and emotion, the expressiveness, the feeling behind the body and the voice is something that I feel like you taught me that, you embodied that in me as a young person looking up to you.
you were a sort of unusual young person.
You think?
Yeah. One of my very first memories of you, I wasn't very old myself. I was only in my early 20s, maybe 22, maybe 23. So you would have been 4 or 5. And you came into your house from outside very distraught because your neighbor, who was younger than you, was insisting that she was older than you because she was taller. And you wanted that resolved because you knew you were older than her. But she was taller. And I remember your mom went outside to deal with it. But I remember talking with you in that moment and talking about how different people have different timelines for growing, and it doesn't make you older or younger to be taller or shorter. And you were so curious. And for me, curiosity is the root of all creativity. I think I sat on the floor waiting for your mom to come back in and tell you everything was okay. I don't really remember. But I do remember you reminded me how children learn the world. And children with big curiosities learn in a different way than children who wait for things to come their way. And
Yeah, and social justice remains a really important value for me. So I'm glad that 4-year-old me also cared about these things on some level, that, taller is not necessarily older.
And it doesn't make you better.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a great segue, because what I want to talk with you about is creativity and giftedness and big feelings, big emotions. And I have always been someone who has really big feelings, and I am often told I am too much.
I know that story.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people, know what that's like. And especially being female, learning how to stuff that into a smaller container so that we're more pleasing for others or more acceptable for others. And for me, it's been a lifelong internal challenge, this feeling so deeply, which has its benefits, but also can get in the way of professional relationships. So I would love for you to speak to that, because, again, you were just so inspirational to me, as somebody who felt deeply and someone who used that for good things in the world and creativity and art.
Well, it's interesting because I was labeled in my family of 7 kids. I was labeled the over dramatic one, and was often told to tone it down, pull it back. And in school, there was a big pressure to pull back in a way, to not be smarter than, louder than, to flatten the playing field. But I just took that for granted. I didn't think of it as neurodivergence. So we're in a whole new world here where there's a recognition that feeling deeply is not how everybody is. I didn't know that. So I absorbed the idea that I was too much, that I was overdramatic. And that was another attraction for theater, that you could be overdramatic in theater. I still don't know what overdramatic means, but I could be on stage and pull up all kinds of energy. I remember in our 8th grade Christmas play, I was told to tone it down. I was overacting. And my father told me not to pay any attention to that. And he said, that's because you're the only one who's acting. I guess so much of it is people who don't feel that way feel like it's not cool to express yourself fully. And so they normalize their softer reactions to things by saying that other thing is too much. We don't want to be like that. I didn't feel like I had a choice. I did stuff a lot of energy down, but when I was on stage or making a stage play, I boomeranged. I mean, I was all over the place in an exciting way, but there was always a focus for it. There was this script that had sound and lights and costumes and characters and interpretations and sets that all needed to come together. So my brain working that fast was actually a good thing. And I didn't get overwhelmed by it. But periodically, people around me would get overwhelmed.
That's one of the most beautiful things about theater is that it can contain the full range of human experience.
Yeah.
And as someone who feels the whole range of human experience deeply and intensely, theater felt like home to me. And it sounds like it felt like home to you too.
It did, absolutely. It was appropriate to be too much in a room of creativity like that.
Yeah. And then that led you to study theater in school.
Yes, although it took me a long time to declare a theater major. I bopped along in freshman and sophomore year of college, changing my major every semester because I kept thinking, or I was told, that somebody as smart as me, I should be a doctor. I kept taking electives in theater and English literature, but I kept changing my actual major. Science, humanities. I was a history major for a while. I wanted to study the Civil War. Talk about a big emotional thing to take on. I even declared an astronomy major for a very short period of time, which is really funny when you know how science is not a native language to me in any way. And I can remember trying to understand the physics of the world and just getting totally overwhelmed by the natural movement of stars and planets and waves and light. I became a theater major in the middle of my junior year because it was obvious that nothing else was going to contain and direct my energy and use what I thought of as the best part of myself, the creative and energetic part of myself. And I know many scientifically minded, mathematically minded people who find great creativity in their fields. It just wasn't there for me. I was burdened by the rules and getting it right. And it's funny because I don't feel that way when I'm being creative. There are, you know, the rules so you can break them.
Theater is great for that.
Yeah.
The rules of theater are to break them
Yeah.
on some level.
And you have to know them so that you can use the tools properly.
Yes.
But you don't have to stay confined by them. So by my junior year, when I had switched majors like 4 or 5 times, I remember calling my dad, who had not gone to college. And I was crying and saying, Daddy, I'm going to declare a theater major, and I'm so sorry. And I thought he was going to be mad at me. And my father had the capacity to say, study what you love, and then you'll figure out what to do with it. That was another thing I could do, is read and make worlds in my head. But my dad wasn't like that at all. But he understood the idea of thinking differently and taking the world on differently. He appreciated me even when he didn't understand me.
And that led you to a PhD from UC Berkeley.
I got my undergraduate degree in drama production, very hands-on, University of Arizona. And then I went and got my PhD in theater, which was a combination of a directing workshop and a critical thinking, criticism and history exploration of theater. And of course, when you study the history of theater, you're studying the history of civilization. You can't look at Greek theater or Elizabethan theater or American Dust Bowl theater without knowing something about those societies or learning something about those societies and what it meant to the original audiences to engage with them and how to make that meaningful for an audience today. You had to do that or you weren't going to make theater that affected anybody, that connected them to their own humanity. It was going to be an isolated experiment, and I wasn't interested in that.
And that brings us to the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1980s and the work that you did with Kaiser on educational theater that really impacted the whole Bay Area and really the whole state. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it was Kaiser Permanente, the HMO. And I was finishing my dissertation on Shakespeare when a friend came running up the stairs to the house and was very excited, saying, "There's a job for you at Kaiser." And I thought, oh, word processing, because I just finished my dissertation. And he said, no, they're starting a theater company. And I read about the theater company. The idea was to help change attitudes and behaviors, to inspire children through large Sesame Street style puppets as well as smaller hand puppets. And I applied to manage the company and didn't even get an interview because of my PhD. I was overqualified. So I had to go back when they hired somebody who did not have a degree in theater. I had to go back and apply to be the road manager. And I took my PhD off my dissertation and wrote graduate coursework in theater and got the interview, got the job. Was the director, road manager, and understudy for all the parts in the show. Frequently had to go on.
Sounds like a theater job.
Yeah. And after 6 months, the guy who didn't have any theater experience left. So I was able to stay there for several years. And as society changed, as HIV and AIDS emerged as something that affected young people too, teens emerged as a primary risk group, different from gay men and different from heterosexual adults. Some of the factors were the same, but, psychologically, a teenager is still a child. I had to learn about how behavior change could be generated through what I knew about theater. And it was one of the most exciting times of my life because I would know, for example, when you're creating a stage picture from stage right to stage left, your brain has to work a little harder to process it because we're used to reading in different ways. When I put a chain of infection across the stage backwards, as people saw it, I became aware of the fact that psychologically it was making people stop and see it differently than if I'd done it in a more conventional way. That's the thing about theater. It's not just the words, it's the pictures that are created on the stage, the relationship of the characters to one another, to the audience. To me, that was so exciting. And learning more about the psychology of changing people's attitudes and behaviors. And theater was the obvious way to do that for me.
I'm Vicki, and I host the Neurocomplex Creative. And if you've been listening to us, I want you to spend some time with Theatrically Authentic. It's a podcast about musical theater, but through a neurodivergent lens, which means it's also about hyperfixation and masking and the very specific kind of person who doesn't just watch a show, they live inside it. There's an episode called The Neurodivergent Pull of Theater that honestly made me feel seen in a way I wasn't expecting. That's what I love about being part of ACPN. You can move from a show about creativity and inner life to one about performance and identity, from something quietly reflective to something that is absolutely running on theater kid energy. And both of them are telling the truth about neurodivergent experience in a way mainstream media just doesn't. After this episode, go find Theatrically Authentic, part of the Autistic Culture Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. Yes. So with Secrets, the show that you developed for Kaiser, can you talk a little bit more about that and the impact that it had, especially for the AIDS crisis at the time?
At the time in the 1980s, we were at the time the only program that I knew of that was aimed at high schoolers. And because we created some interesting stage pictures, we became very controversial, and we talked pretty honestly about how unprotected sex and sharing needles were the two vectors that needed to be looked at and that young people needed to be aware of. I hired a playwright, wonderful woman, Patricia Lowry, who had already written one educational play about HIV and teenagers. And we worked together to make this more of a storytelling than a lesson plan. We wanted people to see themselves on the stage. It used to upset me that we generated so much controversy. There was the focus on the family, and there was a mother's group that I can't remember the name of anymore that targeted me and us. And it used to upset me. And then I realized, oh, those people believe like I do that this play can make a difference. That's why they're so upset. And I realized, no, they get it. They get it that putting young people's characters on the stage in situations that young people might actually find themselves in, and having to process the changing world with HIV and other sexually transmitted diseases being recognized as a risk to teenagers. They realized that that was going to shift something in their child. And so they, even though they were attacking me, I realized they actually agreed with me that this play could make a difference.
Here
and
we
I'm just
are.
enough older than you to remember the advent of the pill.
Yes.
And the idea that women could be sexual beings. And the idea that sex didn't have to wait until sanctified by marriage. So that big cultural shift happening just before HIV reared its ugly head made it possible for some people to do cause and effect. Well, interestingly, after we did Secrets, I was commissioned to do a play for middle schoolers. We ended up calling it Nightmare on Puberty Street because Nightmare on Elm Street was the whole thing. Nightmare on Puberty Street was going back a step before sexual activity, but it also turned out that an emerging crisis was becoming clear. This is back when the CDC was actually doing its job and collecting data and sharing it. There was a crisis of suicide and suicide attempts and suicide ideation among middle school kids and high schoolers. So we took on suicide, early sexual behaviors, bullying, diverse families. It was 4 characters, 2 girls, 2 boys. One was being raised by a single mother, one was being raised by his grandparents. And they were all in various states of trying to figure things out. And again, the controversy was very startling to me. I can remember one very large gathering in the Central Valley. A woman stood up at one point towards the end of a 2-hour public dialogue and said she was offended by the title because puberty is not a nightmare, it's a gift from God. And this one man who'd been sitting in the front row who hadn't said a word pulled himself up, turned around, looked at her and said, "Lady, I don't know where you went through puberty, but I did it right here in this school, and it sucked." And he turned to me and says, "You have my support." And that was the turning point for the whole meeting. it just reminded me that if people were honest with how they learned about life and what they learned and when they learned it and what it meant to them, that they would have found the kinds of engagements that we were trying to do through theater to be truly valuable. But people wanted to push that away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here you are, an arts educator, someone who has a PhD, someone who has been working with their community and working in the arts and building these programs and building these relationships where really at the core, at the heart of all of this is emotional intelligence.
Oh. It felt like a calling. Like it was important to say things that weren't being said any other way. And to say them in a way that was accessible and welcoming and non-judgmental. And that theater seemed the perfect way to do that. I'm thinking we did one for older adults called Ready or Not. It was about aging. And that never quite got traction because there's no institutional system like schools to get the information to people. But whenever we did it, older people always came up to us and wanted to have the script so that they could do it for their community center, their church. So it was a different kind of experience because they felt like something our playwrights and our advisory committees always came up with something that spoke to a core experience of humanity. And I haven't thought about Ready or Not in a long time because it didn't get the traction that both Secrets and Nightmare on Puberty Street did. As far as I know, both of those plays are still touring in Kaiser Permanente regions in both Northern and Southern California. Well, since then, the last thing I worked on was called Harlem Voices. And very, very different in conception and in intention, but still very social justice and personal change focused. It was written and conceived by a friend of mine, Clovis Lewis. He called it a musical, but from my perspective, it was more of an opera or an operetta. It was a beautiful evocation of Black culture in America, starting in the Harlem Renaissance, but going all the way over the course of a couple of plays to the 80s, when there was a big change in our engagement with concepts of race. And Clovis and I used to do conversations with the audience before and after. And he, as a Black man who composed the play, and me as a white woman who could show curiosity and be non-judgmental and try not to take anything from his story. It was really hard because, when somebody talks to you about the racism they've experienced, you want to share a story about how you saw something similar or you wish you knew what to do. And it's not about me. I was there to help break open a story that was going to touch people and ask them to think differently, to have curiosity. This goes back to that whole question of curiosity. And curiosity isn't worth much without reflection. Time to stop and think and talk about it. And that, to me, is one of the most exciting parts of the theater experience that a lot of us don't get to have, is the conversation in community. Let's just stay and talk about this now. And I began doing that for all kinds of productions. Dance and music and theater. We called them catharsis cafes.
Beautiful. And to that end, As you mentioned, I am a curious person, and I have a lot of curiosity right now around how to, I can't even call it sustaining a career because at the moment there is no career. But recovering from burnout as a neurocomplex person and someone who has big ideas, but lives in a body that can't execute all of those big ideas all at once. It's literally impossible.
I don't know if I have any advice because, first of all, neurodivergence just in and of itself is so complex and divergent that anything that might work for me may not work for somebody else. But I do know that the concept of radical acceptance, this is what is. I just accept this is what is. These are my feelings. These are my limitations. They are. And not trying to fight them quite as much, to give myself permission to sit with those limitations and those frustrations, and then choose what I can do and engage with it for myself. When I start thinking about other people, I get overwhelmed. But if I think I need to be doing something, what might that little piece be? I am currently taking a complete break from theater in my retirement. I have been offered a couple of opportunities to direct something or participate in a group. And I'm realizing what I need right now is that reflection space. That I'm still asking myself all kinds of questions that I don't have answers to, and accepting that this is the space I'm in right now. I have questions, no answers.
Yeah, so living in the questions.
Yeah, living in the questions and living in the radical understanding that I'm unique, I'm weird, I'm too much, I'm all of it. And finding people for whom that's okay. I've been very fortunate that way, including my relationship with you. I mean, you've never once told me to tone it down.
If anything, I would tell you to keep going. And likewise, that's why I love you and why you are such an inspiration to me and to so many others.
Well, and too muchness is a gift. It is a challenge, but it is also a gift. Us too muchers are the ones who make things happen in the world. But we don't have to take it all on ourselves. There is that saying from the Talmud, I'm Jewish, that you don't have to solve all the problems, but you can't neglect the work either. You don't have to fix the world, but you can't pretend that it doesn't need fixing. And my chosen way to do that is through theater, but I also see so much happening in other artwork, in visual arts, in music, in dance. And saying things, showing things, provoking questions that can't be asked with regular old words. As much as I love language, I recognize the limits of language. And I want everybody to have the chance to find their artistic language. If it's movement, if it's music, if it's visual. I think it's not fair to keep that locked away from people who might be considered neurodivergent merely because they haven't found their artistic language yet. Or people who might be considered challenging because they haven't found their artistic language yet. The thing that connects us to our own humanity and the humanity of others. I come back to that. And everybody's artistic language is unique, just like everyone's thought process and nerve center is unique. So you have to be exposed to all of it so you can find the one that matters. That's my biggest wish for people who are burnt out, that you find the way through it.
Sabrina, I love you so much.
I
Thank you
love
so
you.
much for being on this podcast.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing this, because it's easy to feel isolated and weird and alone. And it turns out we're really not.
Or
There
we are, but we can do it together.
Yes, exactly. And we will always be too much. Always, always, always. I love you, and I believe in you. I believe in these conversations. I think they matter. And I look forward to hearing from people who hear this, their perceptions and questions too.
Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Thank you for talking with me. It was a pleasure.
If this episode resonated with you, come find me on my brand new Substack at A Hat on a Hat on a Hat, where all my hats live. It's where I write about the creative life, the neurocomplex life, living with chronic conditions, and everything in between. You can find it at ahatOnaHatOnAHat.substack.com. And if you want to support the show, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Vicki Peterson. That's buymeacoffee.com/VICKIPETERSON. Every cup helps keep me going at whatever pace is sustainable. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for listening. Support autistic-led media through Autistic Culture Plus and enjoy bonus content, early episodes, and ad-free listening. Visit autisticculture.supercast.com to learn more.